I was able to trace one route back, and I found out I was related to Henry III, which really sounds great, but he was my 25th great-grandfather. He was also my 24th great-grandfather. And all these years, her voice is still the same Scottish voice that I remember hearing as a child. December 7th in 1941, he has, the war starts for real, Japan attacked the U.S. That's just amongst his other, just casually there.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Life Edge podcast. Today our special guest is Brian Nash. Brian, why don't you take a brief moment and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you offer?
Yeah, my name, as you said, is Brian Nash. I'm a genealogist. I actually really consider myself more of a family historian. Just genealogy is, the professional name that most people are more familiar with. I have a YouTube channel where I go over the basics of genealogy, the how-to, and also I share people's family stories. But what I do is through my YouTube channel, I do offer coaching because, as I was telling Chris just before we get on this the recording, is that honestly the best person to do your own family research is yourself. It's the learning how to and having that guidance is really, I find, what most people have, and it's where the fun of genealogy comes from, and the fun of making those discoveries about your family. I've been interested in genealogy since, well, back when I was a wee tyke. I was given actually this family tree right here, which was I don't know if you're doing video, but this is was a typed up one that was given to me on my mother's father's family, and I was really fascinated for a number of different reasons. But I've always been interested in history. I studied medieval history in university, and it's really around that time when I was in university I started doing a little bit of family history research. Life sort of got in a way, and did a lot of other things in between, but it's been the last few years where I've really gotten back into it more seriously, and it's amazing the things you can discover.
My basic understanding of genealogy is you're just doing research, going down your family lines and learning who are the people that made you exist today, and learning about them and understanding them. Just go ahead and correct me or help me, give me the simplest version of genealogy, and then also give me why it's important. Why should people understand their genealogy? Okay,
well, you've sort of hit it on the head there. Genealogy is just basically that following back your genes. You're finding your roots, so to speak. Like I said, I prefer to call myself a family historian because it's the stories of your family that are really kind of interesting. It's really important to, I think, for genealogy, for people to be interested in it, is because a lot of history is not taught. And I know as a younger person, I liked history, but I liked history when I found it personal, when I found some connection. And genealogy allows you to do that. It allows you to research your ancestors, find out what they were doing at a certain time in history, good and the bad that you'll find, but you can then learn about the context that they lived in and actually appreciate the time a lot better. There's so much to learn, and some people say we're getting into a cancel culture where people want to judge history, but I think a lot of times when you get the understanding of history and what it was, and appreciating things from the historical context, doesn't mean you necessarily approve them or agree with them, or it would be right to do today, but you can kind of understand some of the context behind it, and it's really important to get that. To have that understanding of your own family. It can be just really exciting. My YouTube channel started actually from a podcast I had that I still do occasionally, but called How We Got Here. And that's what it's really about is, you really can't get to where you're going if you don't know where you came from. And having that understanding really is important. And I think it's missing in a lot of people because they don't have that personal connection.
Mm-hmm. One thing, I was watching some of your YouTube videos, and you had a video where you're just kind of going back through generations of people. You weren't looking at anybody specific. There was like this fan chart on there, and it went you, and you were the number one there, and then it went to your parents, and you had 2 people there that created you,
Yep.
And then you go back, and then there was 4 more people, and you don't really think about, like, by the time I think you get to your 5th generation of grandparents, there was 36 people involved, or 64 people, one of the two. And then what blew me away was, you probably know the number, was the 25th generation.
Yeah, your 25th great-grandparents, which is the 28 generations back. There's 134 million plus people. Now, I know my own family research, and I know my family came from the Great Britain, the British Isles, Scotland and Ireland. But I was able to trace one route back, and I found out I was related to Henry III, which really sounds great. But he was my 25th great-grandfather. He was also my 24th great-grandfather. And you got to understand that the British Isles had a population of about 12 million at that point. So there would be a lot of people that I was related to more than once living. And again, that's only that one group, because their children and possibly their grandchildren could still be alive at that point as well. So that even makes a larger number of people that would be related. When you start thinking at that perspective, you really it really grows quickly. And a lot of people don't see that. They don't understand how quick that doubles. The same as when they're looking at if they get a DNA test, when they get these ethnic origin results, and they start saying, well, I have this percentage. That means, I have somebody that was from this area that was, that must be my great grandfather. Well, it may or may not be, but it doesn't mean that necessarily. And when you start breaking the DNA down, you're not, after so many generations, you're not going to have that much of a trace of that person's DNA, because it does the exact opposite. You get 100% is you, 50% is your parents, 25% for your grandparents, 12.5 for your great grandparents, and it keeps going down and down. So you mentioned right there that you were related to, it was King Henry III. Is that correct? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, so how did I find that out?
Yeah, how did you get back that far? Is there paper trails? How does this work?
There is. It was a pure luck thing in a way, that I was tracing my father's family, which I don't do a lot of research on it, but there was one particular line I was able to get to my 6th great-grandmother. So that would be 9 generations out. And I found out who she was and her name from the records that I've been able to follow through. And that's one thing that's really important is, again, because when you're looking at the number of people, you're matching. You got to make sure you have the right person that you're matching. And when I looked at her and I was able to confirm information that I could through records, I found some references into her in books, and then I found references to her husband. And then from there, he was a part of a European nobility, and there was, at that point, if you can connect something like that, there are a lot of history textbooks, which, as long as it's legitimate and legitimate child from that relationship, you can actually wind up tracing far back. It doesn't happen, but like I said, the odds are that anybody who has British Isles relatives are probably also from that long ago, or else probably related to them. So,
gotcha. So you mentioned what kind of books are you looking at to find these, to be able to trace this back?
Well, depends on the situation. At this point, I had been doing some research, and part of it is one of the great things is collaborative genealogy. You build on the work that somebody else has already done. So at this point, I use quite a lot on archive.net. They have actually a library feature where you can get a lot of books, old books that are in the public domain. You can find just about anything. So I just started searching, because when I discovered that she was married to I believe he was a lord, I knew there was probably something. So then it was just a matter of tracing that back. And then once you do that, there's known genealogies that are there that you can find. So there's all kinds of different sources when you get back that farther. But that's not really the fun part. Honestly, the fun part is finding those things that are I want to say unfindable, or we call them brick walls, and it's kind of breaking down those. Like half my family on my dad's side, it's all Irish. So once you get into Ireland, there's a large period where there's not any records, because in the 1800s there was a fire and a lot of the records were burnt down, and then again when a lot of the records that remained were destroyed during the Irish Civil War in the early 20th century. So there's a lot of church records, but I have Patty Murphy and Bridget Murphys in my family, Patrick Ryans, and it's really hard to find and know you're finding the right one. So it's building those traces. You're finding them, you're finding what their children, making sure they match out to what you have, and then sort of work from there. It can be a challenge sometimes, and then sometimes you find you come across something that works done for you. So,
how does DNA play a role in this?
Everybody's probably seen those YouTube videos where the YouTube person's reviewing their DNA and they're talking about, I'm, like I said, certain percentage, this and that. Those are great. Honestly, that part is not really, if you're interested in your real family history, it's not the important part. It's the cousins that you wind up matching. They'll give you lists of people that you're related to, and by making those connections, if those people are also in the genealogy and weren't just a person because they were curious what their ethnic origin is, they might already have some records. So you find out that somebody's your fifth cousin, which means that you're so with cousins, a simple rule of thumb is you count the G, because that's where you're related. Your first cousin, your common ancestor, is your grandparent. Your second cousin's it's great-grandparent. So, if you find somebody that's your fifth cousin, then you're looking at your fourth great-grandparent. If you have that in common, they might have already done the research past that, or they might have information that can help you, which is really exciting. They might have family stories that you're not aware of. For instance, I have one ancestor that came to Canada. His brother wound up going to Australia, and I've sort of made a little bit of connections with family down there. And it's not that many generations ago, really, but enough that it still shows up in the DNA. So,
what has been a really exciting story or something that you've discovered either in your genealogy or helping somebody else with their own?
Again, my own's always going to be the most exciting to me, because it's really that getting personal. A lot of the things, the relatives that I knew, like my great-grandmother, my mom's side, her father's mother, she is my most recent immigrant. She came from Scotland in 1905. She was 13, but she was really on all the records that shows her younger, because from doing my research, it was cheaper for her if she was younger on the trip across on the boat. So, being Scots, people like to say we're cheap, but the family just nudged her age a little. You couldn't tell. But one of the most really exciting things is, from doing some research, I was able to find a record. I saw my grandmother the last time I saw great-grandmother. The last time I saw her, I was 6 years old. My dad was in the military. Then we moved kind of farther away, and she was the sweetest old lady. But I found somebody had done some research, because she was in a small mining town in Cape Breton, they've been doing some research at a university about mining communities, and they had an hour-plus interview of her. It was done about a year before she died, and I was able to stumble across that and find it. There was no digital recording of it anywhere, so I was able to contact the archivist and I said, "Hey, listen, I can't get there. I can't listen to. Can you transfer it to digital for me?" They transferred it to digital. I've been able to share it with other relatives, and all these years, her voice is still the same Scottish voice that I remember hearing as a child. So, personally, that's probably been my most exciting find, but I really kind of cherish, because it's something. We have no recording of her. We have pictures and stuff, and I've been able to actually, through meeting cousins online, my grandfather, a lot of his siblings wound up going to Massachusetts, or they call it the Boston States, just post World War II. So I was able to connect with some of those cousins, and they have some pictures and stuff and things on their side of the family, even of my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather's brothers and sisters and stuff. So that was pretty exciting. And her husband died before my mom was born. My mom had never seen a picture of him. So I didn't realize that. So I had a picture of him. So I showed my mom at Christmas. I said, "This is your grandfather," and she had never seen a picture of him. So that was quite exciting for her, like being able to do that things. My grandfather, who's up there he was in World War II, and I stumbled across at my grandmother's house before she died. She'd moved into a nursing home. She just died last year. She was 99. Didn't quite make 100, but I found these little silk handkerchiefs, and my mom who's not overly, doesn't have as much interest as I do in that type of thing. She was going to throw them out, but I started looking at them because they were kind of musty, and they were on them. Let me see. I have them right here. This, I think, is really kind of neat. My grandfather, he was involved with the Canadian Army that liberated Rome. So I don't know if you can see this. This is, it says, "A souvenir for my wife, Rome, 1944.
Wow.
So I can picture, like, this was some little old Italian lady had taken dresses or whatever she had and embroidered these things and was selling them to make money, to try to get their life together. And my grandfather brought them home to his wife. It's just, that's finding those type of things. And that's not necessarily, that's part of genealogy. That's the part I like, the getting into that, getting into the stories. I'm even finding out a lot more things about my grandfather's war experience than I knew from digging into things and trying to find some records of him in military dispatches of the Canadian Army. And I'm finding that as much as he was always a hero to me, I'm finding that he really was. Just little things when I read them in dispatches, things he never would have bragged about or told. Just finding those things are really, really exciting. This is one of my favorite stories. I was looking back at my dad's side of the family, and I was looking through city of Halifax, which is where his family was in Nova Scotia, a family director, and I found, I think it would be my second great-grandfather, I found a listing for him in his business, and it said that he was a cordial manufacturer. And I thought, well, that's nice. He was pleasant. Why would they note that? But and this is stupid me. I also found in there his father had a company where his father had come over from Ireland. He had the rights to make certain brand of Irish ginger ale so he was a soda manufacturer, cordial. So, but yeah, it didn't dawn on me right away. I was just saying, he must have been well liked, but he was polite. They noted that in the city directory. It seems kind of weird, but okay, I get it.
That's awesome. You mentioned something earlier when we started that you don't know where you're going until you. I think it was you don't know where you're going until you understand where you've come from.
Yeah.
How much has genealogy given you appreciation for the life that you have today?
It's given me a lot of appreciation. I'm discovering new things every day. My mom gave me these little notebooks, just little ones her grandfather had written down when he was in his 70s and 80s. And they're just little things like the weather was, sunny. I brought in a load of coal on December 7th in 1941. He has the war starts for real. Japan attacked the U.S. That's just amongst his other little, just casually there. And it's funny because he records the deaths of people in the community, like Mr. McDonald died, and it's very formal. Even his daughter, he referred when they had my mom's sister who died in infancy. He referred to them as Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, not my daughter Charlotte and her husband or anything like that. Or so he has in this list of people that died. He just Mr. Roosevelt died, and then just continued on, and it was when. FDR died April 12th, 1945. It's just, but it was just written as if he was there. But I really have an appreciation because he was in his late 70s and he was talking about haying, taking in hay, and that he grew up farming, but he was a salesman. He sold Singer sewing machines apparently, but he still went and he helped on his family's farms, and he would hay like in his 70s, and it's just all through these little things, just the things he's talking about, and that's the that was these books are from the 40s and 50s, and even then, and then going back further and finding out some of the things that just really gave me an appreciation. His second great-grandfather, the first ancestor from Scotland that came to Canada, on one side of the family, they helped build this church, and this church is now actually this was built in 1830 or so, and then about 10-15 years ago they took that church and they moved it to, there was a Highland village, sort of a reenactment type place. They moved it on a river, so this church that was built in the 1820s and 30s by my third great-grandfather, almost 200 years later, it was still structurally sound, that they could move it by floating it on a barge down a river and moving it to a new site. And you look at buildings that are built nowadays, and the quality of stuff is just the workmanship, that something that could last that long and be able to be moved. It's just fascinating, and seeing that types of stuff, it really gives me appreciation. My mom's family, other than her grandfather's mother, most of them came over here because of the Highland clearances, and it's something that's really touched me. And a lot of people don't know what they were.
I don't know. Could you explain a little bit?
Yeah, most people that have Scottish ancestry that came to North America or Australia or South Africa or anywhere the British colonies were, between 1760 and 1850-ish, probably were here because of the clearances. In Scotland, they were called crofters. They were basically farmers. They were they didn't own land. It was generally the clans that owned the land and the clan chief that owned the land. But they rented it. If you've ever seen the movie Rob Roy, where he's paying dues to the tenant, the landlord who was an actual lord, that's the type of thing. So in the 1860s, these landlords in Scotland started realizing that if they got rid of the people there, they could make more money just having sheep than having people. So they basically kicked them out. And some of these were places that the family had been for hundreds of years. It was like the family house, but they never owned it. So a lot of those people came over to Canada, the U.S., like I said, anywhere English people were, they came over here with nothing. Their land was taken. What they knew of everything was taken, and they were quite serious about it. They would basically go into communities. They would burn down the houses. They were stone, but they all had mostly thatched roofs. They would burn those down and force the people to leave. There was people slaughtered because they would not leave, and a lot of people don't know that part of the history and the bloodshed that brought these people over to North America. And these are, the people that, for the most part, founded a lot of the things that we take for granted. Even the form of democracy that we're used to in North America, a lot of it derives from Presbyterianism, in that sort of form of government with a group of overseers that would be representative of the people. It's really kind of interesting, but to realize that they came from literally nothing. Sometimes they were given, the government really was encouraging this too, so they would actually give them grants of land in Canada or wherever, but it was random. Sometimes whole communities would move, and you might not have known what the land was like. You could get there and it was all rock. And there would be no farming, but you were given this land. It sounds great, especially for people who never owned land, but there was nothing they could do. But they survived. They persevered, and they became leaders of nations. And a lot of, in Canada, a lot of the infrastructure that was here early was built by the Scots. They were the masons they wound up being stonemasons and built buildings. They did all kinds of things that, out of this real kind of a tragic situation. Ironically, a lot of these people also went to New Zealand and Australia, and shortly after, the sheep market really fell, because in New Zealand they wound up these farmers they wound up farming sheep, and they had such better grazing land and crops. They were undercutting the Scottish market, so the Scottish market for sheep actually fell quite a bit, and it was New Zealand sheep that took over, ironically, but that came several years later. But it's just,
funny. That's funny that the greed of the Scottish, when they kicked out the people who had been farming on their land, ended up being the downfall of their.
And then actually after the sheep, they turned a lot of these into estates where they would have deer and stuff running, and they'd have, you'd call them preserves, but they were basically for noble hunting. Like they would still go out and hunt stag and whatever. Yeah, it's and a lot of them wound up, like my grandfather's mother's side, they wound up actually moving from where they were rurally into Edinburgh first, and they wound up working in the industry there. And on the other side of the family wound up in Glasgow, and they became coal miners. And then the early 1800s, after that, they wound up coming over to Canada and to Cape Breton and being coal miners, because that's what they had relearned. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, because even though my middle name is Patrick, I am very German, and I understand a lot of German history, and American history, but I don't know much of any other history, really. Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing that. One question I did want to ask is, how did Facebook, did that change the genealogy world at all, as far as making it easier to find and connect with people? Yes
and no. It did. I mean, technology definitely has. And social media definitely has. The difference is, and it's kind of what I talked about earlier, about making sure you get it right. I've looked at people that have online family trees, and it looks really great. They go back hundreds of years. But then when you start examining it, okay, so how come the grandfather was born before the grandson? Or they're just taking, like, they would take a Bill Smith and a Mary McDonald. Oh, they're married. Oh, here's a Bill Smith and Mary. It must be them. Not even paying attention to it.
the details.
and not going back and having the records. That's one of the wonderful things is I have a lot of the records of ancestors from Scotland because they have them digitized. I have the signatures on baptism certificates and things like that I can see that unless I ever went over there and at one point would have had to dig through records or microfilm, it's quite interesting, and it's really neat when you're looking at something and you're like, wow, that's my third great grandfather's signature there on this form. It kind of gives that humanness to the human touch. You can relate to it. You can say, this piece of paper I'm looking at, even if it's just looking at the picture, he touched that. That was him, attesting to something. And it's just so Facebook and stuff has helped for that. It's helped for, I know a lot of people use it for connecting with those cousins, and it's helped with people that are doing genealogy. There's different reasons people that are doing it because maybe they were adopted and they're searching for birth parents, or just because they want to have an idea of what that family, make those family connections. It can help that way. But like with anything, all the good, you really need to be wary and be careful of it. Even the reputable companies, they're stock full of these, I want to call them bad family trees, and anybody that does genealogy and takes it seriously, that's one of their biggest complaints is that looking at these bad family trees. And that's one of the things I try to teach people, and that's, like I said, about learning your own story. That's really up to you. It's sort of knowing how to do it and what kind of things you should be looking for to prove that that's the person, and then you start looking at the actual family history. I mean, it's easy. I just did a video the other day. It's really easy to start your family tree. Most people can get 3 generations simple, and they'll have all the information. They'll have themselves, their parents, the grandparents. They probably know all the information on that, or they can find it very easily. And they probably might not be able, unless they have themselves a copy of the birth certificate and stuff. They're not going to get it because privacy issues, a lot of things. You can't easily get birth certificates and death certificates until after a certain amount of years pass by. Most jurisdictions it's different. But there's usually some idea. A lot of them is around 100 years for birth certificates because they figure people have passed away at that point. So you can get those 3 generations, and that can take you back pretty far. And when you have that, then you can start piecing together the things depending on and learning things. Like Scottish people generally have they have a naming system that they would normally use, and the Irish are very similar. You would name your first son after you. Your second son would be after your father. Your third son would be after your wife's father. Then it goes to so you can actually, if you know that your grandfather's name was Andrew, and he was the third son, then you know that his father's name was Andrew most likely. So if you're looking for her parents, you can sorry, if it's your second son, it would be her father. So you would know, I didn't know his name, but I know he was the second son. So when I'm looking for her parents, I'm probably looking for an Andrew. So it helps. Again, not a guarantee, but knowing some of those rules, and you'll see it distinctly. Like that's one of the things that fascinates me. My grandfather's name was Andrew, and that's my middle name. And going through this, I see how many Andrews there were, and up until about the 20th century, most Scottish families still sort of held to that. It gets confusing because when you already have one Elizabeth, say, because that's, again, because these names duplicate, but it might be on both sides of the family. You might have an Elizabeth or a Mary, so it can kind of mix things up, and you have to, it makes you a little bit aware of that, but getting those things can really help you find things and can help. Again, it's not a guarantee, but can help you have that little more of a significance. Even understanding like what an average age of a generation is. So when you go back and you do that doubling and the doubling, you can sort of know, well, a generation is 20 to 25 years, so this is sort of the range I'm probably looking at. I'm looking at most women did not always, but it wasn't as common to have children after 40. So you can sort of guess, if you find out the last child when they were born, the mother was probably maybe 40. It depends, but most times will be often younger than 40. You can sort of guess by when they started having children. You can possibly guess the ages in marriage, but again, that changes in past times, where it would have been a lot more common to have a 16-year-old bride, as opposed to nowadays it would be very rare. So you learn some of those things, and you can kind of, it helps guide you by getting that general history, knowing the history of the communities. That's one of the things that's a lot of people miss when they're doing their family history. They don't look at the communities, and you can find out lots of interesting things by digging into that community. Because if you find old newspapers, you might find mentions of your relatives. And even in my lifetime, the small community my mom's from in Cape Breton, when we were living far away because my dad was in the military, when we would go and visit, it was in the newspaper. It was just this little article, they're Charlotte and Gumps Anderson's daughter, and it's visiting from, and like, you can find that type of thing. You can find, I have a beautiful picture of my great-grandmother, the one I was talking about earlier, and she was, I think about 21, early 20s, I found it, and it's just because she was in somebody else's wedding picture. She was standing with them, and I just recently found that actual by complete accident. I found, because I only knew the last name and I knew it was a wedding picture, but it really helped me date it because I was researching that community, and I came across, when I was trying to add people to the community, because I'm trying to build up a database of the people that lived there in the 1920s, I came across her marriage certificate of this woman, and she had signed it, and it was the same last name as that I had known. Well, this was Elizabeth Anderson, and this family name. It's like, oh, so this is when this picture was taken. So you can find out a lot of interesting things. So
I'm so fascinated by it because I enjoy history. I enjoy my family history. I like learning about where I came from and how I ended up here. I love understanding where I came from because, like you said, I appreciate what my family has done for me. My grandma, great-grandma, getting on a train in Chicago, traveling from Chicago to Phoenix, because she just needed to do something to change the lot. And hearing the just how hard my grandma was compared to how we live today, and some of the no air conditioning, living in Phoenix, Arizona. Are you kidding me? That's pretty amazing. As we start to wrap up, there's one question I love to ask all our guests, and that is, what is one important lesson that you've learned in life that you want to share with all the listeners?
Important lesson I learned in life is, honestly, don't take it for granted. From doing my research on my relatives, you also come across a lot of child deaths. When you go back years, that it was a very common thing, and when you start searching in communities, you find that people, didn't always live as long as they do now, and you really get that appreciation that you need to appreciate it and enjoy life while you have it. Make time for your family. You make time for yourself. Make time to learn. But you just really get an appreciation of life in general. Just because, I look back, I have my grandfather's side of the family in Cape Breton. I found several death records of them. Two of them, both named with the same first name, which would be cousins of my grandfather, died in mining accidents, both squished by mining carts. When they went to work that day, I know from listening to recording my great-grandmother, when talking about how she would prepare and she'd be up if they were working, their wife was expecting to see them come home that night. their kids were expecting to see them come home that night. Their kids, maybe they were mad at their father. They didn't realize that the thing they said might be the last thing they ever said. So don't take life for granted. I'd live every day like it's your last, because it could be, but also, enjoy it and just don't take it for granted.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Brian, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people go to learn about you, watch the stuff you put out on YouTube, maybe get some coaching on finding out more about their genealogy?
Yeah, the best place to find me is my YouTube channel. It's called How We Got Here Genealogy. If you go to youtube.com and put a slash and then just put the @ symbol, How We Got Here, you'll come up to my channel. From there, there's a link to my, if you go to the About page, my email address is there. You can find me on Twitter. Again, it's just How We Got Here Pod, because it's originally from my podcast. On Facebook, I have a Facebook page for my my podcast and my YouTube channel called How We Got Here Genealogy. You can search for that. YouTube's the best place. Reach out. You have questions. I love helping people, and I love sharing what I learned to try to help people learn and get to find out some enjoyment in these things for themselves.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure to include all those links down below in the show notes as well. So thank you everyone for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.